Is it just me, or did 2019 go by way too fast? It feels like just a couple days ago we were talking about Child's Play rumors and Halloween sequels that were going to release a month apart, and now it's already almost 2020. It's just weird, isn't it? Anyway, with the new decade comes new horror movies, so I picked out 10 of my favorites that I think are worth paying attention to over the next year. One of the first horror movies, or movies in general I guess, coming out in 2020 is Sony's reboot of The Grudge, which releases on January 3rd. This one's actually been in the works for a while, and even though it's an American reboot of a classic Japanese horror film coming out in January, it actually has a lot going for it. First off, the movie is produced by Sam Raimi, and his production company Ghost House Pictures is working with Sony to make sure this isn't another Slender Man, because that would be terrible. I hated Slender Man. Another reason I think this one could be good is that the director, Nicolas Pesce, took a smart approach to making it. Instead of trying to make a Japanese movie with an American production company, Pesce wrote a story that takes place here in the United States but retains the core elements of the original film. So of course, the main focus here is a suburban home cursed by a vengeful ghost who violently murders anyone who enters. And from a stylistic standpoint, it's clear that they made sure to film it like the original so that it's not a completely different movie using a title to get people to come see it. Yeah, Black Christmas, I'm looking at you. All jokes aside, The Grudge was actually supposed to release against Child's Play on June 21st this year, but at the last second, Sony bumped it to January of 2020. Now, with any other production company, that would be a really bad sign, but Sony's actually put out some good stuff in January over the past couple years, like Insidious 4, The Last Key, and Escape Room. Next up is Gretel and Hansel, which comes out right at the end of January on the 31st. This one's directed by Oz Perkins, who also directed an A24 horror movie called The Black Coat's Daughter, and that alone is reason enough to be excited in my opinion. That's mainly because The Black Coat's Daughter is up there with The Witch and Hereditary as an example of excellent slow burn American folk horror. And from the admittedly vague trailer we got back in September, it looks like Gretel and Hansel could be just as good, if not better. Another thing the trailer seems to tell us is that instead of trying to put some goofy or unnecessary twist on a classic fairy tale, this one's going to do its best to show us why that fairy tale scared the shit out of people back when it was written. The cinematography and fall atmosphere are absolutely perfect, and it gets bonus points from me for incorporating the classical style witch, you know, with the pointy hat, the green skin, and the crooked nose. The two big things worrying me about this movie are its release date and the production company making it, which is Orion Pictures. They haven't exactly put out anything incredible since they came back a few years ago, but hey, this could be a big turning point for them, and I genuinely hope it is. I've been looking forward to The Lodge ever since I saw an ad for it on the back cover of an issue of Fangoria a few months ago. There isn't a ton of info out there on what it's about, but the basic premise is that a stepmom and her two stepkids get snowed in at the family's remote winter cabin, and once they're all locked in, tensions rise and things get even darker from there. It originally had a release date of November 15th of this year, which would have been awesome, but then the studio bumped it back to February 7th of next year. Thankfully though, we don't have to worry about that being a negative sign because it premiered at Sundance back in January and everyone absolutely loved it. Every year coming out of Sundance, there's one horror movie that all the critics latch onto, like Hereditary, and they say this is the biggest horror movie of the year and I saw it before you. So make sure when you can see it in like 6 months or a year, you definitely check it out. Now that could be a good or bad thing depending on what you're into, but I'm definitely into those movies, so I'm excited for The Lodge. After Universal completely shit the bed with The Mummy and killed their dark universe one movie in, they decided to let the pendulum swing in the other direction. Instead of making another bloated action movie with Johnny Depp as the Invisible Man, they hired Leigh Whannell to write and direct a low-budget psychological thriller starring Elizabeth Moss. Basically, her character is dating a physically abusive scientist who commits suicide after she says, "I dump your ass," and then he leaves her a whole lot of money. After a little while though, she starts noticing weird things and starts to suspect that he might not be dead after all. I'm personally a huge fan of Leigh Whannell as he's the writer behind some of James Wan's best movies like Saw and Insidious. And on top of that, he wrote and directed a movie last year called Upgrade that was basically what if Venom was good. Whether spoilers bother you or not, I would highly recommend skipping the trailer for this movie because like every other Blumhouse movie, it looks like they're giving away the entire plot in the trailer. So either way, just go see the movie on February 28th. You probably won't be disappointed. One of the biggest surprise horror hits of the past few years was John Krasinski, Scott Beck, and Brian Wood's A Quiet Place. Incredible production design and some genuinely scary moments went a long way in making up for CGI bat monsters, and it ended up pulling in over $300 million. So naturally, a sequel was greenlit immediately despite its fairly definitive ending. At first it looked like this one was going to do something original and focus on a completely different family, but then the entire cast was rehired and it's most likely going to be a direct follow-up. The interesting thing here though is that the first movie ended with the surviving Abbotts figuring out how to severely injure monsters by using their incredible hearing against them, so I would assume this movie is going to focus on them trying to figure out a way to kill even more of them. Regardless though, John Krasinski proved he's a great director with the first movie, so I'm glad he's coming back to direct the sequel, even if he didn't hire Beck & Woods to help him write it this time around. There's no actual release date yet, but Paramount says we'll be watching the movie next year in March. Antlers is a movie that's flying under people's radars, but if genuinely scary monster movies are your thing, you should be paying attention to it. Not only is it produced by Guillermo del Toro, it's also written by Nick Antosca, the genius who created the criminally underrated Channel Zero anthology series for Sci-Fi. The story follows a kid who lives in a small Oregon town, and from the trailer, it looks like his dad has transformed into a monster, which then, of course, escapes. There are also some pretty big names attached to this movie like Kerry Russell and Jesse Plemons, so hopefully it delivers on its awesome premise when it releases on April 17th. Things really pick up for horror in the middle of next year, starting on May 15th with the reboot/sequel to the Saw franchise, which as of right now has the working title The Organ Donor. There are a few reasons why I think this movie is going to be pretty cool, but the first is that Chris Rock wrote the movie and is starring in it alongside Samuel L. Jackson. Apparently Rock walked into Lionsgate with an idea that would shake things up in the story while also remaining canon with the rest of the films, and Lionsgate liked it so much that they immediately gave him the okay to get started on making it. On top of that, Darren Lynn Bousman is directing, and from everything we've seen so far during filming, it's going to be extremely bloody. Another plus here is that it doesn't have any connection to the last movie in the series, Jigsaw, which while it had some fun kills, was a weak comeback for the series after a fairly long hiatus. Now this movie was originally going to come out in October of next year so they could regain the tagline, if it's Halloween, it must be Saw, but then it was bumped back to May after the last movie on my list was announced. Now that Jordan Peele has established himself as one of the biggest names in horror, he's going the route of Sam Raimi and producing movies while he directs his own, and one of the biggest ones on his list is the reboot of Candyman. This one's going the Halloween 2018 route and considering itself a direct sequel to the original movie set in the modern day. The story is going to be set in the Cabrini Green housing project where the original took place, which is now apparently a gentrified area. Lakeith Stanfield is supposedly playing the main character, who's a visual artist with an affinity for the Candyman legend. There's no word on whether or not Tony Todd is coming back to play the Candyman, but we do know that Yahya Abdul-Mateen II is going to be playing a younger version of him. And even though it would be nice to see him back in the role, he's given his blessing to Peele multiple times and isn't upset that they're going in a different direction. Even though we don't know a whole lot about this movie, seeing the name Jordan Peele attached to it makes it hard not to at least get a little bit excited to check it out on June 12th. Coming in at number 9 on my list is Edgar Wright's Last Night in Soho. Other than the fact that it's directed by Edgar Wright, this one's being billed as his first straight up horror movie, which makes it somehow even more interesting to me. It doesn't come out until September, so plot details are pretty light, but from what we know, it takes place in London during the swinging 60s, and the main character is played by Thomasin McKenzie. On top of that, Anya Taylor-Joy is co-starring with her, and the theme of the movie is allegedly built around the classic saying, "Be careful what you wish for." Edgar Wright is one of the only directors out there whose movies I will always watch sight unseen, and I hope this one turns out to be another modern classic like pretty much every other movie he's ever made. If you've watched one of my videos before, you knew I wasn't going to leave out my most anticipated movie of the entire year, Halloween Kills. It's the first of 2 direct sequels to Halloween 2018 that Universal announced earlier this year, and from what we've seen during filming and from the various little bits of info that have leaked out, it's going to pick up right at the end of last year's movie. Another cool detail is that a ton of different characters from the original Halloween like Nurse Marion, Lindsay Wallace, Tommy Doyle, Lonnie Elam, and Sheriff Brackett are all coming back to face off against Michael Myers with Laurie Strode. From what we've seen so far, this one looks like it's shaping up to be pretty damn great, and I'm personally excited that David Gordon Green came back to direct it along with the next movie, Halloween Ends, because as we're seeing with the Star Wars movies, when you switch up directors in the middle of a trilogy, things can get kind of weird. Halloween Kills releases on October 15th next year, but if you want to hear way more about it, you should subscribe to my channel and go through the backlog, because I think I have probably like 100 videos at this point about Halloween 2018 and Halloween Kills. And there you have it, 10 horror movies I'm excited for going into 2020. Now the last time I did one of these videos was for Bloody Disgusting in 2015, and back then it was kind of hard to come up with 5 movies to be excited about in 2016, and this year when I was coming up with 10, I actually had to cut some off at the end. So if that doesn't prove that horror has exploded over the past 5 years, I don't know what does. Definitely let me know which of these movies you're excited for and why down in the comments below, and also if you want to follow me on Twitter and Instagram for even even more horror updates, it's at Jimmy Champane on both, and they're linked in the description. Anyway, that's all I have for you guys today. So as always, my name is Jimmy Champane, and I'll see you in the next one. Shape on.